We continue to reflect on the 8th commemoration of the Marikana Massacre, and to this day, the families of the victims are still waiting for justice to be served. The Socio Economic Rights Institute of South Africa, Seri, said the persistent failure to prosecute those responsible in the Marikana Massacre has further fueled police brutality in the country. We speak to the Executive Director of the Socio Economic Rights Institute, Seri, Nomzamo Zondo, who joins me now live via Zoom. Nomzamo, good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us here on the SABC News channel.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, 8 years later, still no justice served for the people of Marikana.
Look, so for the families, from the moment that they participated in the commission, they had a few things that they had hoped for. They'd hoped to find the truth of exactly what happened to their loved ones. That did not happen by the end of the commission. It became hard to see it happening in any other way except through criminal prosecutions, because they would put every policeman on the stand to explain why they discharged their firearm, who they discharged it at, and at least provide some more information about why 34 people had to die on the 16th and 3 people had to die on the 13th of August. And unfortunately, that has not happened. We've seen the prosecution of 9 police officers, 5 of them from the incident that happened on the 13th of August, 4 for lying about one of the deaths, about where a death occurred on the 16th of August. The families also wanted an apology, and in fact asked for this apology in August 2015 when they launched litigation to claim for compensation. And the state has, from the end of 2015, been playing a duck and dive game about whether or not they will provide that apology, despite the fact that President Ramaphosa tendered an apology while he was speaking at a university event in Grahamstown. So the families have not received that apology, and they're not asking for a lot. They're simply asking for someone. The Minister of Police is their request. The Minister of Police, if it's the president, even better, bring them together in a room and say, we are very, very sorry. The police should not have brutally murdered, assassinated your husband, your son, your brother. You should not be here. You should not be a widow. You should not be without a father. And that hasn't happened. The families also asked for compensation. And they asked for compensation exactly because for as long as the massacre is borne by the victims, we'll never see any willingness or any action taken by the state to ensure this doesn't happen again. And I don't need to remind South Africans of what we've seen in the last few months in terms of police and army brutality. And that's exactly because the police have failed to account for the Marikana killings. And in fact, we have those police that were in Marikana are deployed today in communities. They've never been disciplined. They've never been criminally charged. And it must be that the victims must receive compensation to make sure no loss whatsoever because of the massacre. And secondly, there must be compensatory damages, which are the damages that are saying, "Siyanxenxeza, we are sorry. This should not have happened to you." And we have not seen that happen. In fact, in the last 2 years, there's been a tug of war between our office and the Office of the State Attorney, because they do not seem to understand why we feel there must be compensation for the fact that they've their fathers, they've deprived wives of their husbands. They've said to us numerous times that they don't understand why we insist on claiming something that we are calling what that is called constitutional damages for the breach of the right to life of the minors, for the breach of the right to family life of the remaining family members who are making the claim, for the breach to the right to dignity. I think the one thing the families kept saying from the beginning of the commission was that we didn't expect this from the police.
But then
we thought the police would be there to protect us.
How far is that process of seeking compensation for the victims?
So in 2018, the state paid the loss of support claim. So the families had claimed, outside of their apology, they'd claimed for loss of support, which is basically an exercise where the state replaces the income that the minors would have earned. That portion was paid in 2018, and there was an offer made, with the exception of one family where the state has refused to compensate for loss of support on the basis that they feel that the minor who died did not have a legal duty to support his siblings and his nieces and nephews. The families have also claimed, I think I've just explained, for casual damages. And I think after negotiations, we've been instructed to approach the courts and have the courts determine what is the fair amount of damages that should be given to the families.
But then, why has nothing literally happened? Why has justice not been served? Why has this apology not been issued? Why has this compensation, besides the one that was paid out in 2018, and not been paid out to the affected families? Is there perhaps a lack of political will to address this issue of the Marikana massacre?
It is definitely that, both in the Ministry of Police and I think in the presidency, because I think the issue of always been brought to the presidency's attention. I know that outside of the families that we represent, so we represent the families, but there is the injured and arrested minors who have also sought damages, and they are also still waiting. And if there was any political will, both in the Ministry of Police and in the presidency, this issue would have been resolved. I remember there was even a time when the state attorney kept complaining about how there were so many changes in cabinet that they would get an instruction from this minister today, and then 2 months later, it's a different minister who sees things differently. So if Minister Pekitele and President Ramaphosa wanted this issue resolved, they would get on the phone to the Minister of Justice to say, we want the state attorney to come and explain to us why this hasn't been settled, and we want this thing over.
Because we also have some of the recommendations from the Falam Commission, but which have not been implemented.
I mean, I think it's even worse than that, right? There was a panel of experts on public order policing and the use of force, which was constituted, which met, which drew up a report, and then delivered it to the Ministry of Police in 2018. And 2 years later, that report has still not been released to the public, and we have not seen it being effected through changes within how protests are policed, and also through the use of force. And I think, again, the last 3 months is evidence of why we need that urgently.
Mm-hmm. And what are the victims that you represent in saying about government? Do they sort of get some sense of a betrayal, perhaps, by this government? So, like I explained earlier, for the families, and many of them come from rural areas, from as far as Swaziland, the biggest chunk came from the rural Eastern Cape. And for them, they did not expect this of the post-apartheid government. They also did not expect this of the police. I mean, one of the things that's been debated widely in the country right now is why in South Africa we have not called for an abolition of the state. We still have communities that are saying we need more policing. So for this community, they feel betrayed, firstly by the police. But as we sit now, 8 years later, they feel betrayed by their government that's refused to act on the murder of their family members. They feel betrayed by this government that's refused to hold both the police, the National Prosecuting Authority, and even IPID accountable for failing to bring this issue to an end. So I know that you also represent the widows of the deceased. What engagements and conversations are you having with them? And perhaps also talk to us about their daily struggles post this Marikana massacre. Look, so the problem is that it's we've been together on this. It's been a long road. Seri came on board for the families in 2012, and at that time they were in the commission. One of the things that came out whilst they were in the commission was the fact that their families were starving at home. Most of the widows then took up jobs at laundmen. This meant that their children were then left alone. In fact, most of the older teenage kids end up playing the role of parents. On Thursday, we had a webinar at Seri, and both the speakers who were children of the deceased miners, Nowili Nungu and Sbulawo Diao, explained how they are to walk out of teenagehood and become parents because their mothers were now permanently in Marikana so that they could have food on the table. The widows themselves, I still feel like they need to continue this fight
because there's been no justice. And I think it's unfair for us to say this is a massacre that should never have happened, or to even be as conservative as what the ruling party would say that this was a tragedy. But the question is if it's a tragedy, why must the victims carry it? Why must the widows struggle to raise kids alone that they shouldn't have had to raise? Why must they struggle to find support, financial support for those kids, and then have to now have their children lose not only the parent that was killed by the police, but them as well, because they have to find another way of supporting themselves? And there's been numerous calls on the government to say, finalize this thing, enable the widows to go and rest and forget and try and imagine a life post the massacre. But for them, the widows are still stuck in the massacre, because every day the action of the government reminds them that their loved ones' lives do not matter to this government. And as you said, they feel beyond betrayed by the lack of inaction. They feel beyond betrayed by the action itself, which resulted in the deaths. But they feel even more betrayed by the fact that the government has continued to drag their feet. They've continued to be forced at each and every instance to provide justice.
All right, so just very quickly, Nomzamo, just in conclusion, what then happens going forward? We are sitting here, the victims still have not received the truth of what might have happened on the day. That apology has not been rendered, you say. Compensations are still outstanding. A Falam Commission recommendation, some of those have not been implemented. There's that policing report that's still sitting there 2 years later. It hasn't been released to the public. What then happens from now going forward?
Look, I mean, I really don't have an answer to that, right? To be quite honest, I'm the attorney representing the families. We will pursue the legal processes. I know that there are different organizations that are pursuing the reform of the police. I know that they would appreciate the solidarity of their fellow South Africans in ensuring that the government feels obligated, because at this point it feels that they feel that they are doing the families a favor, that they are made to feel obligated to resolve this dispute in a way that shows some respect to the families, in a way that shows that they are ashamed of what happened in 2012.
All right, that's where we'll leave it. We thank you so much for talking to us. Nomzamo Zondo is the Executive Director of the Socio Economic Rights Institute, Seri, talking to us about the 8th commemoration of the Marikana Massacre and how far the Institute has gone in terms of assisting the victims in this regard.